I guess really Dell doesn't need any introduction. When people describe Dell to me, they always use words like multi-gifted, multi-talented, multi-skilled. You know, it's just wonderful to have you here. But you probably didn't realize that he was also a family archivist, and he's done a really great job as a conscientious archivist of getting all of his family papers, records, photographs together, and then putting them in a book, which is actually considered part of preservation, digitizing everything for preservation purposes. And then he has actually written 2 books about his family history and about the history of Montauk, which are really excellent. And a lot of the photographs that you will see in this exhibit are also in his 2 books. But I think that one of the things that happened is that when we were working with the photographs here, we were able to scan them. A lot of them are very, very small. They're about 1 inch square, or maybe 1.5 inches square. And even though we had a great sense that there was a certain power and monumentality within these tiny photos, our IT guy, Britt Manzer, who's standing back there, had bought this fantastic scanner for us so that we were able to scan at a very, very high resolution. And all of a sudden, these photographs that were wonderful photographs in and of themselves really seem to be just entering a realm of the kind of Grand Canyon photographs that you would see, you know, taken by famous American photographers. And one of the things that happened is that when Lisa Montella, who's sitting back there, was framing the photographs, we both fell in love with this family because we got to know the photos so well. And we nicknamed that photograph over there of the woman in the car. We nicknamed her the Montauk Mona Lisa because she had such a wonderful gaze. But in any case, it's been a real pleasure working with this collection. I want to thank all the Pitts, the Burks, the McDonalds, the Cullums, and you're related to everybody in Montauk, which has really been wonderful for me. I asked Dell to not only talk about the Shine, which is this animal whispering that has sort of animal whispering that's been handed down in his family. I know your mother, Vanjie, had it, and I think your father, Leo Burke, had it as well. I think many Pitts had it. In any case, it was very interesting to me. Really explains his ability with animals. But also, I asked him to talk about how he became the family archivist, and also, additionally, because he also did home movies and did oral histories himself, I asked him if he could, at the end of this program, before questions, play a home movie that he made of his grandfather, Leo Burke, and some other family members. He actually was not able to use the sound of the film, so what he did is he put it together with music, and as Carolyn Balducci said to me, sometimes you'll get an even better effect with that, and I think it's just a wonderful piece. So, Dell, thank you so much for coming here, and take it away.
Hi everybody, thanks for coming. It's a pleasure to have everyone here to enjoy these photographs and my family's history here at the Montauk Library. I want to thank everybody at the library for putting this together, this event together, but mostly Maura for really putting in the time of going through these photographs at my house. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of people that put it all together, but Maura actually sat there with me on several days and over a period of months, and we went through these photographs, which there's hundreds of these photographs, and they're all sizes and they're in all kinds of shape, and it was a time where I got to sit down and look a little closer as well, but not so much as seeing them now because they have been blown up. It's almost for me like seeing them for the first time because I can see things in the background that I know about but never saw in the picture, and things I didn't know about that I'm seeing in the picture. It's almost like every time I look at these photos I get a new sense of joy. And how cool is that? I mean, these pictures are over some of these pictures are over 100 years old. So it's fun to be able to share these with people like yourselves, and particularly in Montauk. With that said, I wanted to, I did put together a small little slideshow, and I'm gonna talk about my family a little bit as we go through that, rather than sit here and do a short lecture without having a good visual stimulation as well. Some of these photos are on the wall, but most of them aren't. Some of these weren't added, or actually I wouldn't know now because I see they've hung up dozens more around the library. So I'm not sure. I tried to get ones that weren't up last week when I came here, but already I could see there's plenty more, which is great. But it kind of tells a little story. Can I get the lights, my friend? And again, thanks everybody for coming. My family came here right after the turn of the century from Nova Scotia. They were French Canadian, and most of them were fishermen. Instead of one family, my great grandparents, instead of them coming, what was unique about it was the whole family, or most of the family, came together. And which ones didn't come in the first trip ended up coming eventually. And what was neat about that is they stayed together. They lived together. They lived close by each other. And it's that sort of camaraderie with families that makes this story so beautiful. Family strong. Here's a picture in the collection. It's from a boat, and it's coming in around the point. It certainly shows a difference in what is the erosion has now done in front of the point. Gives a good perspective. I like to think that this is a picture taken when my family was on their way or coming from, or not necessarily the first time, but after a couple times, and they see this on the boat. Maybe coming back from fishing, they would see this often. And it was a marker for them. This was home, and this is our home. So I thought this picture was quite interesting. This is one of the postcards. However, this is where my family lived. How it was west of this area, but we're going to get into that in a minute. As you can see, if you can barely see on the top of the hill, in dead center in the background, is still the Montauk Inn. And you could tell because there were separate. There was a water tower in, and then there was another building. So you can tell the difference. Of course, the manor you'll see in a couple other pictures. But this is the type of village that my great-grandfather brought his family to, and it was right on the water, literally, as you can see. And it also kind of gives you a little bit of a better perspective on how the hurricane would have affected those that lived on the water. Look how close they are. This is an actual aerial photograph that was given to me by my cousin Patty, who just came in, from her family, and that is a picture of where my family lived on the beach at Fort Pond Bay. They were, many of the houses that you're seeing were all, especially in the central area, was my great-grandparents, my grandparents, my great-aunts and uncles. They, like I said, when they came out as a family unit, a group, and lived and started a new life right on the bay here in Fort Pond. If you look at this aerial today, that's what you'll see. And the area that you were just looking at would have been this area here. Okay? So, kind of gives you a better perspective. You can see the manor in the far right corner as well, and of course some of the other features that you'll see. Anyway, this is a picture of my great-grandmother, Minnie. Mary was her real name, and her sister, Nancy Poirier, on the boat that they came to Montauk on. But in the background, you'll see some of Montauk's early background along Fort Pond Bay. And that would be my great-grandfather, Benjamin Pitts. His real last name, his French-Canadian name was Pettipaw. So all the Pitts that you know out here that are still with us, and the new generation, their original name was Pettipaw, P-E-T-I-T-P-A-S. Of course, when they came here, they shortened it and kind of Americanized it to Pitts, made it easier. Albany Pettipaw was his name. So where he changed Albany to Ben, I think was just a pick a name sort of a thing. But the Pettipaw to the Pitts, you can kind of see there was a similarity. That's my great-grandmother, Minnie. And she was quite a character.
You could tell.
This is a picture of Ben, or my great-grandfather Ben's mother, okay? This would have been my great-great-grandmother. Margaret Mallet was her name, Pettipaw, and she was blind. She couldn't see. This picture really creeps me out a little bit, but I think for historical value, it's pretty cool.
Dell, what was your grandma's maiden name?
My great-grandma, Minnie McDonald.
Oh, she was a McDonald. Okay.
Yes, she was a McDonald. This is the Pitts family. So when I said that eventually the whole family came, these were Ben and Minnie's children and their husbands and or wives, and the manor is seen in the background, and I'm not sure where the picture was taken. Do you have any idea? When I keep referring to the front row, it's kind of a special surprise. I actually have my mother here today, and as well as my Aunt Frances. And they, of course, grew up on the bay together when these pictures were being generated, some of them.
That might be near the railroad.
That was right.
Yes, it was near the railroad.
Yeah, because I
Yes.
saw that
Yes.
where the houses
Yes.
were, and if you look straight
That's
from
a
that.
Railway Express building right there.
Right.
Oh, I follow.
Okay. Okay. Here is a picture of course, Ben and Minnie had children, and here is a picture of three of them. That's my Uncle Vitus, and that is my grandmother, Evangeline Burke, and that is my Aunt Mary. Okay? And they're outside eating. Of course, my grandmother here is very young, as well as they all are. Vitus is a big part of this exhibit because Vitus is somebody who was interested in photography and is responsible for a lot of these pictures. He also kept a scrapbook, many of which are out there that you can see. And if you saw some of the scrapbooks, you would see how meticulously he was about collecting things and telling a story with cutouts from newspapers, and he puts them in a scrapbook and he makes it a book of a story of the time and the location that he was at. They're out there. When you go out and look at the exhibit, you'll see them in the cases there. Again, this is Mary, and I didn't even see the young person. Again, once I see these pictures, I've seen this picture, I put this together last night and I didn't see that person in the hat in the middle. Just didn't see it. It's like every time I look, something new happens. This is Mary, my grandmother, and Angela. That's who it was. The little one is Angela. So it was somebody I knew. That's Mary, Vanjie, and Angela, and that's them back in, I would say, probably the early 80s. Okay? Which I love seeing, because this is how I remember them. This is how we remember them. My cousin Cheryl is here also, daughter of Francis. So we've got a little family thing going on here. And it's good to see these pictures. This is Vitus when he grew up. He was a very handsome man. He actually he loved Montauk, however he did live in the city, but his heart was here in Montauk, and he would often write back home. He was very close to Minnie, his mother, and that was Vitus just before he passed away. And when did he pass away? Was that in the 70s, or probably in around?
1980.
Was it 1980? You would. I tell you, Maura knows just about as much of our family by this point. I can refer to her as well. Absolutely. Of course, my grandmother. This is Vanjie, which was her nickname. Evangeline was her full name. Vanjie lived on the bay. She happened to, at Jake Wells' store at Fort Pond Bay, happened to play a game. Well, it was a push tab game where you push in a number and you took a chance, and whatever you pulled out, it would either tell you how much that chance cost you, okay, or you may win a prize, and that's what made it a game. This was again at the Jake Wells grocery store. So she did it, and she won what probably back then would have been the grand prize, was a Brownie camera. And once my grandmother got a hold of the camera, we end up seeing the rest of what makes up this collection. And that's the two people that are responsible, two of the three. Of course, on my father's side, my father was very interested in photography. So he, as well, did an equally impressive collection, which is also part of my archives for my family history. But that's a whole other library and a whole other story. Meanwhile, back in Nova Scotia, in the same town that my great-grandparents came from, this gentleman, Simon Burke, who happens to be my great-grandfather, to my grandfather, Leo. That's Leo. After he moved here, he didn't know my grandmother, even though they lived in the same town in Nova Scotia. They didn't know each other, but now when he came, he ended up in the same place as my grandmother, which they would soon meet. But that was my grandfather's boat. He came here and worked at, with my great-grandfather, Ben Pitts, worked at the Promised Land in Lazy Point, at the fish factory, until my grandfather was able to afford to get his own boat. And this was the boat. And he named it the Buddy. He eventually upgraded the boat. The charter fishing was big during this time. And he was a fisherman out here in Montauk. He met my grandmother, and they lived next door to Ben and Minnie Pitts. So once again, the family's staying together, and it's starting to grow. And this is a picture of my grandmother and grandfather years later. They were married for how many years, Ma?
65.
65 years. And they had a child.
Me.
And that would be my mother. And my grandmother had a great opportunity. She didn't really like living at Fort Pond Bay. She was a young girl. She had aspirations of something better, and she got a great opportunity. She met somebody, this woman right here. Her name was Emily. And she trained my grandmother in bookkeeping and gave her a job. The job, however, was in Jamaica, in Queens. So she eventually would move and go to work for Emily before she eventually would come back. But the reason I bring up this lady and this picture is because they became such good friends that when my mother was born, they named her after this woman. That's Emily. And here's the letter she wrote to my grandmother and grandfather, congratulating them on the birth of their daughter and how happy she was to hear that it was named after her. Wow. And it's a very, very neat letter. This is the kind of stuff that was handed down to me in this collection. It's not only photographs. I've got everyone's naturalization papers. I've got their birth certificates. I've got my grandfather's captain's license. This is my mom. And then they had a second child while still at Fort Pond, and that would be my Uncle Buddy. That's Buddy Burke. When Buddy was born, both my mom and Buddy and the family were still living on Fort Pond Bay. And the reason I bring that up is we're getting to a vital point. But here is a great picture of, and I posted this for a particular reason. That's my mom, and that's my Aunt Eva. That would be Patty's mother. Who's the one in the middle? Do you know?
Margaret Rawson.
Margaret Rawson. There's Buddy in his white school uniform. And then that would be my Aunt Marie. Okay? Now you notice that Marie and my mother are wearing the identical clothing. This was kind of a joke in the family because everything my mom wore, Marie had to have. So when they made something for my mom, they always made sure they had the identical thing made for Marie or there would be a big fuss. So this would not make my mom very happy. This kind of bothered her. However, she managed to deal with it through the days until they got older. One of my favorite all-time pictures. Not only because I get to show it to you and talk about it, but what I'm going to tell you is going to make you laugh. But great shot. The young lady in the dress that's on backwards and it's filthy is my Aunt Selena. Actually not doing so well, and our prayers are with her today and always. She couldn't be here with us, and I'm sad because this would have been a wonderful opportunity to laugh at this photo one more time. Selena is Francis' sister. And Frances is right next to her in the back with a big beautiful smile. Okay? And next to her is my Aunt Blanche, who is also here in Montauk. Couldn't be with us today because it's hard for her to get around. But we love Aunt Blanche as well. And then on the far right would be Marie. Okay? There's Marie and my Aunt Marie. And the girl in the middle was not family, but she was a very good friend and seems to be in a lot of our photographs. So I don't know where her family was, but they didn't do much with her. So she became part of our family. Marion Sayer, would I be fair? That's who would be. Marion's in a lot of our pictures. You'll see them all around. In fact, her parents are in one of these pictures. Yeah, that was another one I never really knew. I always wanted to meet her parents. After all, I thought she was family. The coolest part about this picture is my Aunt Selena's dress. And I often asked, why is she wearing her dress backwards? And I finally got an answer not long ago, and it was the best. It was worth the wait. You should see the other side. What happened is, this was a common thing to do back then, is when you got your dress dirty from playing, instead of, throwing it in the wash, because, you had to be frugal, they just turned it around until you got that dirty. And then at this point you would see she's probably ready to have that go in the laundry. But I love that picture. And again, here's a picture of giving you an idea of what it was like as kids to be growing up in Fort Pond Bay. There was a lot of family, so it must have been a joy. And can I speak for you ladies to say it was a treasure? I often like to use the phrase that my family has always used to say that they were poor, but they didn't know it. And for that, they were rich in family. And here's a picture of mostly everyone there is my family, except Marion. But she got right in there, which is so cool. That would be Frances right above Marion, making the funny face, and my mom to the right, sticking her tongue out. And above her would be Aunt Eva, Patty's mom. So this is just really, really one of my favorite pictures here. It's like the Little Rascals of Fort Pond Bay. You almost want to know there's a movie coming.
Dell, who was next to Buddy?
Next to Buddy, this over here,
No,
there, Aunt
Is
Selena.
that Selena? Okay.
Yep.
And the
Aunt
one
Selena.
on the top there,
That's Pat.
that's Pat McDonald,
Right.
and she's still living.
That's right. Pat lives in
4
Vermont.
years old. I talk to her every day. She lives in Vermont, and
She's 90,
she's 94.
94.
And that's who I'm named after.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right, Patty. That's right. I forgot about that. Her mom was Diana
Yes.
McDonald. We're going to discuss that at the very end. I'll show you a little clip. But that's Pat up there. Her mother passed away.
She was in a car accident.
She was in a car accident in Montauk, and we'll discuss that in just a second, because it's part of history, and I'll show you how this collection kind of puts some things together. Here they are, best friends, my mother and Aunt Frances, okay? And it's really kind of cool to know that they're best friends to this day, because someday your children are going to be me doing this about us, you know, which will be cool. Which will be cool. So yes, there they are, and there is my mom and Buddy, and my grandmother and grandfather at the house at Fort Pond Bay, and then came the hurricane. And my grandmother was fortunate enough to be able to take a lot of pictures around the bay during the hurricane. Now, there's some in the book. I'm just going to show you a few here, but let me tell you, she took dozens, and they've never been seen, and they're really cool. But I didn't want to throw them all out. I want people to enjoy them in small doses, because that's the way history is best consumed. Yes,
What year
ma'am.
was that?
I'm sorry.
The hurricane, what year?
1938. Yes, ma'am. Here's another picture showing you the coastline. Now, these would be the sunrise cabins that sat on those brick pillars that you see in the foreground, and they've actually were lifted off those pillars and all pushed together. And there's your beautiful manor in the up on the hill in the top there, and a beautiful train car also to your right. There's my Uncle Buddy standing next to a house that's literally, half the back end is in the water. There's another picture that shows you, he's right on the coastline, right on the shoreline of Fort Pond Bay is all this debris. It's quite a storm it was. Here is a shot of my Uncle George, my great-grandfather Ben, George's wife, my Aunt Mary, my grandmother, and my great-grandmother Minnie, standing in an area that still exists, did after the storm, talking about whatnot, and apparently I'll bet, I like to think my grandmother, who seems to be more focused on having her picture taken, probably handed the camera to somebody and said, "Take my picture." That's what we do, right? It wasn't selfie time yet. So if somebody else wasn't around, I'd like to know who that person was. It'd be kind of neat. But we haven't been able to figure it out. You know, I found this last night, Maura. Did you know of this? Because this was kind of cool. But if you see, it's a letter to the editor of the Star. in 1938 on October 10th. So that wasn't far after the
Do you know
hurricane.
what day it was? The actual
The hurricane?
October what?
The 21st of September.
21st of September.
We're gonna do a program next year on it.
Because my
Oh, good.
birthday, that's the day before my birthday.
Oh, really?
That's right. Oh, wow.
Well, you'll see here, it says, there's a gentleman who wants to mention that certain people needed to be thanked for saving the lives of others during the hurricane. And it mentions Peter Burke stood guard at the entrance to the fishing village to see that looters would not enter. Now, that would have never dawned on me that that would have been a problem back then, but I guess why not? I mean, why not? And then much credit should be given to Captain Fred Pitts, who our family knows as Uncle Gus. You'll see some pictures of him out there. He was one of the greatest, if not the greatest, fisherman here in Montauk. He knew the spots before anybody else did because he probably found them. And he had the Marie, which was a very well-known charter boat back then. And of course, Captain Leo Burke. Herbert McDonald, Thomas Joyce. Joyce is our family as well. And Joseph Gomez. All who rescued many women and children from their homes. There's a lot of neat stories about what my family did during the hurricane. Maybe we can talk about that during the hurricane, your hurricane program,
That would be great.
because it would take up a lot of time. But there's a lot of recorded incidents that my grandfather was involved with during the hurricane, including saving his own family, pushing a car up a hill to get to the manor so they'd be safe after their house blew down. Eventually, the Fort Pond area after the hurricane, after they kind of recovered from that, the Navy ended up buying the land, and it became a torpedo testing range. And meanwhile, families were moved. My grandfather built this house. This is a house that he ordered out of the Sears catalog for $500. And the only thing he did different here is him, along with his brother Melvin, who is a great character as well. He was a chauffeur out here in Montauk. Melvin and my grandfather dug a basement by hand and then lined the walls with rocks. Because my grandfather was a mason and a rock worker as well. In fact, the stone arrangement that you enter through on Eastgate and the one across from Heather Hills on Old Montauk Highway were built by my grandfather, Leo. Okay? They built this basement because that's what saved their house during the hurricane on the bay. They had dug a basement, the water filled up the basement rather than immediately sweeping it away. And because of that, my grandfather immediately came, when he got his house on secondhand, dug a basement and then built this Sears house on top of it, which now is still with us, right across from the old Swiss chalet, which is now Soul East. Fortunately, it stays in the family even. Cheryl and her husband own the house. So it's wonderful to have that still in our family because it stands and looks very similar, the front does anyway, as it does today. And in the background is the Montauk School, which actually is up on the top of the hill out the back. So there's a little perspective illusion going on in this picture. However, this is an early picture. I don't think you can see the school from the front of the house like that anymore. Then my aunt was born. She was the third child from my grandparents, which is my mother's young sister, Margaret Lockman, married to Bob Lockman, who was also a very well-respected gentleman here in Montauk. And this would be my Aunt Margaret. And here is a picture of the whole family. That would be my grandmother, my grandfather, my mother, Uncle Buddy, and my Aunt Margaret. Okay? And I don't know, that was probably taken in the late 70s. Yeah. Probably their 50th anniversary. And then I wanted to talk to you about this since we brought it up. As you can see, there was a father that had a priest that had a camp on the fort. It was at Fort Pond Bay. It was a boys' camp where he'd have kids from the inner city come out and enjoy the water and some activities. But meanwhile, the young ladies that lived there on the bay enjoyed it because it was a chance for them to see new boys in the area each summer. So Father Bell was in charge of this. And Father Bell, unfortunately, was in a vehicle with Harry Conklin, who at the intersection that we all know of, Second House Road, and that major intersection there, which is very bad, as we know, very, very, very dangerous at times, struck and killed Diana McDonald, who was my Aunt Pat's mother. Fortunately, she was killed, and that's how she died. Turns out, and I put this up there for no other reason, because I find it an interesting article, because Harry, as you see, didn't have a license, okay? And he caused the accident, which caused the death of somebody, but meanwhile, everyone was exonerated and everything was fine. Now, I'm not trying to bring up a big, bad argument here, but it just shows you how things were done and handled differently back then. Clearly, he was at fault, but it was an accident. The daughter was left alone, and our family immediately swoops in, and boom, she's raised by her aunt, okay, with no second thought. And Pat was raised that way as part of Gus's family. And that was just the way things were done. And I find it very interesting. That's Harry Conklin, who I happened to find this picture in a load of old pictures that were on its way to the dump. And I grabbed the envelope and I went through them, and on the back it says Harry Conklin from Montauk. So I that's how things happen, how simple they happen. That's Father Bell. These are the children. A lot of them are, my mother's in here, Francis is in here, they're all in here. I'm not going to go through that. This is another interesting picture in the collection. This is my great-grandfather in a wonderful picture of him clamming, but in the background is what makes it awesome. That's the Pelican, after it was towed in from out to sea. And that's Nat Edwards' float, one of the boats that helped tow it in to that spot there where it sat for quite a while until it was taken apart and salvaged. And I believe there's a piece of it that's the porthole, there's one glass porthole window that from the boat that is at the Whaling Museum in Amagansett. That was my grandfather at his favorite time of year. You'll see his cane and his hat and his bow tie out in that thing, because that's the one thing I wanted immediately after my grandfather passed. This is what this is what my grandfather lived for, except besides his family, was the St. Patrick's Day parade in Montauk. It meant everything to him. Okay. And that's my grandmother, Vanjie. And that's her. And this was an article written about in his obituary. They mentioned that my grandfather was an animal lover, and how we began each day feeding the birds. And that's what brings me into this. What it is the connection that my family had with animals. It was you couldn't help but see it in my grandparents, Leo and Vanjie. They had this a draw. Animals loved them. They had dogs and cats, but wild animals, it was amazing. I used to see my grandfather hand feed wild rabbits. I've been in the wildlife business a long time. That's one animal you just can't get close to unless they're injured. but you can't hand feed rabbits. My grandfather would go out, they would come to him. I saw it, I couldn't believe it. It's something I never forget. Just like when my grandmother came and saw me in Hawaii when I was living there, when I was in the service. My grandmother, my mother, and my Aunt Mabel came out to see me, and we all sat at a picnic table, and my grandmother took out some bread, and she just started walking around. And all of a sudden a pigeon landed there, and a pigeon landed there. And you know, no big deal. But next thing you know, there was 20, 30 pigeons, and they were on her, on the table, all around her. And they weren't all frenzying about food. They were very gentle with her. And she, on the same hand, was very, and the picture is on the back of your program when it first started. But it didn't faze her, it didn't make her nervous, it didn't get her afraid. She had a connection, and you could clearly tell she did that on purpose. And it was drawing these animals. I just never forgot these things. As I got older, I saw my grandfather at the end of the pier over on the pond, Fort Pond, the little pond out there where the paddle boats used to be. There's a picture out there of it. I don't think I put it in here. I did. Of my grandfather feeding swans. Now, we all know how aggressive swans can be. My grandfather had that shine, or that energy that he had with these animals. And he was, you know, this is not something you had to ask him about. He would tell you. He loved his cat. He loved his dogs when he was younger, but he was mostly a cat person when I knew him, when I was a young kid. And he loved his cats. He loved these animals. He loved those rabbits. He loved feeding the swans. And I know that this is where I got my love for animals from, because it's such a passion for me. It's hard to explain it to people, but if I can explain it through by talking to you about how my family affected me with these ideals as a young kid, I have to give them credit, because I really think it's what led me into where I am today, and has given me the opportunity to have that same connection of energy with wildlife, you know, and I really believe that, and I always will. That's a picture of me and my grandfather. I'm 14 years old. And my dad was also very, very close with animals. He raised birds before I was born. In fact, my bedroom was a bird room where he raised cockatiels and tried to match certain ones together to make new colors. So he had a gift as well with animals. And I just like to show this picture because, like I say, I believe what I have came from them. Same as the gift of family and closeness in family I got from these people and their history, and the history being handed down to me. And through my cousins, we're going to keep this alive, and their children, and we're going to keep this alive. I am sure of it, because it's such a wonderful thing to be proud of. 2-minute video to end this presentation. Again, I can't thank everybody enough. I hope you all enjoyed that. And I really appreciate you sharing this time with me. And Maura, thanks again.
Thank you.
Just can't thank you enough. All right, let me just show you guys this. 1977 at my grandparents' house in Montauk. Just magical time. Thanks, everybody.